Okay, so I want to talk today about a topic that might ruffle a few feathers.
Ooh.
Might make people get a little bit upset, but I'm not trying to do that. What I'm actually trying to do is make people feel better about this particular topic so
Okay.
that they don't basically work themselves right out of this hobby. The problem that I'm talking about is something that we see all the time. We see it every single day in the Tank Talk Facebook group. We get emails, we get messages, and this is people that are basically desperate to find a problem with their aquariums.
Mm-hmm.
And
That happens. It does happen a lot.
it's almost every single day. And what these people, and I don't mean to say these people, I don't mean to be disparaging, but what ends up happening is we get involved in a hobby. I've recently taken on a new hobby myself, and I've kind of done this with this new hobby myself. We go crazy over this new hobby right off the bat, and we kind of research ourselves to death in this hobby
I
or
agree.
whatever hobby that we're into. And we spend all day long watching videos like this, watching live streams, reading articles, reading books, doing all of these things, going absolutely crazy and basically burning ourselves out of whatever hobby it is that we're getting into before we ever even get the chance to really enjoy that hobby. And there's some things, particularly with the aquarium hobby, if you can just settle down and embrace the basics, the fundamentals, then you're going to be fine. It's an enjoyable, relaxing, and fun and rewarding hobby or lifestyle, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
But it seems like there are so many people that are determined to make it more than that. I've been guilty of this myself in the past.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have too. We've all been there, but it's nice to be able to learn from other people's mistakes.
Well, and that's what we've always tried to do with this channel is, we're not claiming to be experts. We're not claiming to be, the foremost experts on anything to do with fish keeping, but we share our experiences so that maybe you, the viewers, don't have to make
Right.
those mistakes. But let me lay out a scenario for you that happens all the time. And I mean, you see these emails too, so you have the people that'll email us or they'll post on the Facebook group. I don't know why I keep pointing to the computer when I say that, but they'll post on the Facebook group. I have a 20-gallon aquarium. I've got, 12 guppies in there and a couple of tetras and some corydoras, and everything's great. The fish are eating, the fish are thriving, things are wonderful. Everything is great, but I just feel like there's more I could be doing. I feel like I could make things better for my fish, and I could add something, or I can incorporate this other strategy that's going to make things better. And my response to that 100% of the time is don't do anything.
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
That's right. I mean, there's no reason to mess up a good thing. And this happens. And a lot of times what'll end up happening is you start changing things. I feel like because these are guppies, I have to add guppy grass. And because I have corydoras, I have to do this thing. And you start mixing things up and you start adding and you start modifying things in your aquarium. And all of a sudden things turn upside down and you end up losing everything.
That's very true.
It happens all the time. And this is why I titled the video, "You're Ruining This Hobby, ... for yourself," because it's true. We research ourselves to death, and what we should be doing is researching the bare bones fundamentals, like understanding water chemistry, understanding how to keep a healthy aquarium. A lot of people jump real deep into this before even really understanding that part of it.
No, I completely agree. I think if you're going to research the heck out of something, especially in the very beginning, it should be cycling your aquarium, because you want to have a properly cycled tank before you even stick fish in it to begin with. You stick fish in there, it's not cycled, then you're one of those people emailing, this is happening to my fish, this is going on, that's going on, and then you find out, oh, they just started cycling their tank a week or two ago. It hasn't even run its cycle yet for it to be ready for fish. So that to me is probably the key thing that should be completely just looked into and researched the heck out of before getting a fish.
We've had people email us repeatedly. I mean, I handle the bulk of the emails.
Yeah.
You handle a lot of the ones that are specific things, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you may not know this, but we sell live betas. We call them beta. I call them beta betas because I just can't argue with my brain to figure out the right way to say that word. But we sell live betas on our website. And so we get a lot of people window shopping, if you will.
Right.
And they'll ask a million questions. What's the temperature? How old are they? Where'd you get them from? This, that. And these people don't even have their aquarium set up yet. They set their aquarium up 3 days before the fish arrives that we've sent to them. And then when they get the fish, all of a sudden they start having problems. Then they're reaching out to us. Hey, I don't understand what's going on here. I did everything right.
And after a couple emails back and forth, you realize the problem was their tank wasn't cycled yet.
That's right. And so if they had followed what you just said and, got that part of it straight first, then it wouldn't have been an issue. And this is not just with us. I mean, this happens with all fish keepers, all fish retailers. This is an extraordinarily common thing. We've talked a lot about understanding the cycle and stuff like that. In fact, there's channels that make fun of us. That's all we talk about. But that just shows you how important this topic is, understanding the aquarium cycle. Because dare I say, probably 75% of people that have aquariums don't even know that there's such thing as an aquarium cycle or a nitrogen cycle.
True.
So understanding that is the big thing for sure, hands down the number one thing. But if you're someone that's researching this hobby, what we're able to do these days is we can do a ton of research before we ever spend a dime. And that's a good thing. Back in the day, it wasn't that much. You just basically had to go and buy the stuff and see what happens. But now you can just analyze things and research like crazy before making a single purchase. What you should be focusing on is very simple. The nitrogen cycle, which you've mentioned, we talked about already. You should be researching aquarium size, whatever fish you want. I mean, I've said it so many times, make the decision of what kind of fish you want first. Then you can research the size aquarium that you need for that particular fish. You can research the tank mates that go with that fish and the general rules when it comes to the parameters for those fish, meaning the pH, the temperature. I don't want to go overboard and start talking about GH and KH and all that kind of stuff. We don't need to worry about that right now. We're not becoming professional breeders. We don't need to concern ourselves with that. We need to concern ourselves with pH, with temperature, tank size, tank mates, and excuse me, decorations.
And food.
Well, sure, food. Yes, we can definitely talk about more about food too. But those are the things that you should be researching, and keep it simple. It doesn't need to be something that is over the top. Little story. I've told this story in videos before, where when I was very early on in this hobby, I thought buying things was going to make my problems go away. I had an aquarium that I just could not get clear. I had all these problems with it. I tried every chemical. I tried the red dye, not the red dye, but the red stuff that is red in the bottle and you put it in and it's supposed to make aquariums clear up. I tried all of these things. I went out and bought expensive filters. I did all this stuff. And my buddy that was the only fish keeper that I knew at the time was like, why are you doing all of that? Just leave it alone and let it do its thing. Which is the perfect example of what I'm talking about here is if I, in that case, had just taken a step back and let things do what they're supposed to do, let it be, let this thing come to life on its own, I would have been completely fine. But I was trying to force it. It cost me a lot of money and a ton of heartache.
Another thing that I think people tend to go a little bit overboard with is medication. over medicating your fish when they don't need to be medicated. If you're doing everything you're supposed to do, keeping up with your water changes and feeding your fish a varied diet, you don't need medication. And I think that some people are looking for a reason to medicate their fish. And it's just like with people, you don't want to take medication if you don't need it. Doctors don't just give you antibiotics because you have a sneeze or a cough. They're like, how long have you had this cough? And it's usually a couple weeks, and they're like, yeah, maybe we'll go ahead and give you an antibiotic so you don't get bronchitis or whatever. And I think quarantining is one of those that people think you have to medicate a fish for. I don't medicate fish when quarantining, because if they're in a tank by themselves for 6 weeks or however long, 6 weeks or longer, you'll know if there's a problem with your fish. You'll know in 6 weeks if they have ick or some kind of bacterial infection or parasites. By then you're gonna know. I don't think you have to throw medication in your tank as soon as they get there. If you find a problem with them, if you notice they get ick or you notice that they're sick, then you're going to want to use medication. And that's my opinion. I know a lot of people, they decide they want to use general cure or something right away just to be on the safe side. But I guess an analogy would be, okay, I'm going to get up today, I'm going to take a Tylenol because I think I might get a headache in 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, and it is very common for people to do that in quarantine. And I'm kind of torn on it because I agree with you. I'm a firm believer in don't medicate anything, human beings,
Right.
dogs, cats, fish, if they don't need medication. And the argument is, well, we're going to medicate during the quarantining process because the fish that we have in our main tank are so precious. We want to make sure that all of the fish are completely clear of
Right.
everything before we put them in our tank. And I get that. I totally
Right.
understand it. But if you were keeping the fish long term in quarantine because of that risk,
Right.
I don't know. I personally don't feel like that
Yeah.
needs to be. That's another expense. That's exposing fish to medications if they don't need it. They may need it, but they also may not need it.
Yeah,
So
well, that's where I was going with that. You might have them in quarantine for a week and you find that they do need to be medicated. Well, if they do, then you definitely medicate them. But there's a possibility, and especially if you're getting fish from someone you trust, if you put them in quarantine for 6 weeks, most likely they're going to be fine. So,
yeah, I mean, if there's something significant going on with that fish, you're going to see it. And that's kind of the
Yeah.
whole purpose
Right.
for quarantining. I mean, if you're going to medicate, why not just go ahead and put them straight in with all of your
Yeah.
other fish? But that's another example of feeling like there's only one way to do things. Like, if I'm going to get new fish, I have to quarantine them, which I fully support. And I have to medicate those fish while they're in quarantine. That one I support, again, if needed. If you get the fish, you're not going to buy sick fish, but you don't know what the circumstances are. When you buy fish in, when you bring them in, if they're sick, certainly medicate them. But if you're just doing it as a precaution to make sure you're going to put them in a quarantine tank for 6 weeks or whatever, how long before you put them in your main tank, you should know if they're going to need to be medicated. I love your analogy. I don't wake up every day and take 4 Advil just in case I might get a headache that day. I mean,
Right.
I don't do that, and I don't know many people that do. So, but that's another case of I have to do this. Otherwise, my fish are going to die. They're going to make all of my other fish sick. And again, there are certain circumstances where that is necessary, but not all the time. And if you find out
Right.
that you didn't need to do this and you spent, $35 or whatever it is for a bunch of medications and your fish never really ended up needing them, then you're going to be pretty frustrated because you wasted all of
Right.
that money.
It's sort of like buying a beta and putting it in a 5-gallon by itself and that's its tank forever. It's never going to be with another fish, but you're going to medicate it to quarantine it, and it's never going in a tank with another fish. So, just wait and see.
We get criticized all the time when we start up a new tank and we put fish in there and people are like, you're not quarantining them? It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. They're in the tank by themselves.
Forever.
But that's a perfect example, though, of what we're talking about here is people have gotten so adamant about you have to quarantine fish that they will ask us why we did not quarantine fish that we put into an aquarium by themselves.
That will never go in a tank with other fish.
That makes absolutely no sense, but that's a great example. Like, but they say you have to quarantine.
Right.
Well, okay, you're getting frustrated over something that deserves no frustration. My yellow labs that you have so beautifully behind you right there, people said that in that tank. You didn't quarantine them? It's like
right.
You've got it embedded so deep in your head. You have confused this hobby so much that you believe that I should quarantine fish before putting them into a tank by themselves. It's a great example of what I'm talking about. It's getting so dead set on things having to be done a certain way and getting just over researching everything. You can frustrate
right.
yourself and research yourself right out of this hobby. And I know, because like I said, I have done that with a hobby. I'm not going to talk about my new hobby because it's mine and I'm not going to share it with anyone. So I've done that myself. I had to take a step back. I'm like, wait a minute, let me just enjoy this new hobby and not just completely overload myself with a bunch of information that I don't need. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to relax and I'm going to enjoy this hobby for what it is instead of overcomplicating it. And I don't think that there is a hobby on earth that people do that more than fish keeping.
I totally agree. I mean, you can go and watch tons and tons of YouTube videos on fish, and all it takes is hearing one other channel say something differently, and it makes you second guess what you've been going along with the whole time. A lot of people have different opinions, and that's okay, mm-hmm. but you don't want it to confuse you and get you all,
now you're completely
crazy.
Overwhelmed about something that you should not be overwhelmed about.
Yeah.
It's definitely true.
Yeah, because a lot of people do things differently. It doesn't mean that their way is wrong and our way is right, or vice versa. It just means that some people, it works better for them than others. I mean, there are people that don't even use filters in their aquariums.
And their fish are thriving.
Yes, they're perfect. So
listen, we have a website. I'm not doing an advertisement for the website, but we sell filters and chemicals and the medications that you were talking about and a bunch of different types of fish foods and all these different things. We sell all of these things, and we would love nothing more than for you to go and buy these products from the website. But I don't want you to do it if you don't need to. Exactly. I don't want you to see a problem and say, well, I need this to fix the problem, when you might be able to just take a step back and everything is going to be okay if you just let things go the way they're supposed to go instead of overcomplicating things. The example of aquariums with no filter in it is a great example. What we need to do as fish keepers is take a step back and enjoy this for what it is. It's a glass box full of water with fish in it. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. We don't need to research. Enjoy the hobby and experience the hobby as much as you can, but don't over-research yourself right out of this hobby.
Exactly.
That doesn't work well for anybody. And you may miss out on this beautiful hobby, this thing that can completely change your life. And we have personal stories, not involving us, but people that we've met where this hobby has actually saved their life. So if that's a possibility, don't screw that up by researching yourself right out the door.